Tonight, we're doing something a little bit different. We are dedicating the next 15 minutes of our show to an issue that you have likely felt the effects of: rising property taxes. From what they are to recent moves made to reform them and trends that we have seen about that cost here in our area. We're going to tell you everything that you need to know. So why are we doing this? We know it's certainly not the flashiest topic to cover extensively, but property taxes are important. They affect a lot of us, and something we all value: our money. You've seen it on the news.
Governor Greg Abbott has made it a top legislative priority: property tax reform.
On his list of emergency items, he cited property tax reform.
Two city leaders calling for San Antonio to join the rest of the state with a homestead tax exemption. And in different online publications, homeowners say property taxes are too high. They want and need relief.
Neighbors, you hear them, he says, I can't afford it no more.
And this year, lawmakers heard their call for help. Property values keep climbing across San Antonio and Bexar County. On average, single home values in Bexar County are up 8.7%. So what does that mean for how much you pay? Well, if none of the local taxing entities change their tax rates, then, for example, a homeowner living in the Northside Independent School District whose value grows from $200,000 to $217,000 would pay about $460 more in property taxes. And while property values have been going up all across Bexar County, some areas have felt it more than others. We requested information from the Bexar County Appraisal District breaking down the average residential property appraisal in 2014 and then the average appraisal 5 years later, this year in 2019. We looked at the numbers for every single local zip code and identified the three with the highest percentage increases over those past 5 years. 78234 has seen the largest increase at 229%. This zip code is north of I-35 in the area surrounding Fort Sam Houston. Residential property appraisals on the east side in the 78203 zip code have also increased dramatically at nearly 193%. That area is east of I-37 and just north of Denver Heights. In the Government Hill area, zip code 78208, there's been a property tax increase of nearly 185% over the last 5 years. Southside neighborhoods and areas closer to downtown San Antonio are also seeing some of the steepest climbs. Marilyn Morridge shares some of the stories of people living in those areas.
Behind the white picket fence, Mario Alvarez tidies his lawn at his 1,500 square foot home on the south side.
It's a regular house. It's not a fancy house.
He says his new appraisal indicates otherwise. It's up $25 grand from last year. Alvarez paid off his house a few years ago, but the taxes are becoming an increasing burden. He expects to pay about $500 more in property taxes this year than in 2018 if no taxing entity changes its tax rate. His neighborhood isn't the only one seeing that big increase. Denver Heights is another one. The East Side neighborhood has a rich history. It's one of the city's older and historically African-American neighborhoods. Now it's a mix of neatly manicured lawns alongside boarded-up homes with new and long-time residents. That includes Susie Lopez.
Neighbors, you hear them, he says, I can't afford it no more. It's hard for us seniors because you say either you pay your taxes or you stay without a house.
Lopez lives on the edge of Denver Heights in the bungalow she bought for $10,000 when Nixon was president. Now it's valued at 16 times that.
Most of our neighbors moved out already. These are new neighbors.
Property values are through the roof, soaring more than 160% in the past 4 years here. Mostly it's the land. Take this 1920s home. The land alone was valued at $9,700 3 years ago. Now just the land, $94,000.
The East Side is become a hot commodity.
Neighborhood leader Aubrey Lewis points to new housing, restaurants, office buildings, economic growth.
If you look further way out east, look what HEB is doing. They've started at Foster Road coming this way.
Denver Heights is located just across Interstate 37, literally the other side of the tracks from downtown. The east side land is a lot more affordable than prime downtown property or much of Southtown, making it very attractive.
We want to see positive growth here. All business is not good business sometimes.
Property taxes at their most basic level are pretty self-explanatory. They're taxes on property that you own. But things get more complicated when you look at where that money goes, how it's used, what determines how much you owe, and exemptions you can get so that you pay less. Let's start here tonight. There was no state property tax in Texas. Instead, property taxes are paid to local governments, school districts, and other taxing entities. The money is collected by the county tax assessor collector, who then divvies it up among those entities in the county. In Bexar County, there are more than 60 taxing entities. The formula that determines how much you have to pay seems simple, but again, it's more complicated than it looks. So we've broken it down into some simple terms tonight with the help of some well-known building blocks. This is the formula that's used to determine how much you'll pay in property taxes. It might seem simple, but a lot goes into this process. First, the value has to be determined. It starts with the appraisers. They don't set tax rates. They only determine how much your property is worth.
That number is our opinion of what a hypothetical sale price on that property would have looked like on January 1. That's what the state requires.
In Bexar County, there are 55 appraisers. They're in charge of looking at every single house, and there's a lot of them in Bexar County.
We have a little over 580,000, I believe, residential properties to appraise. So no, we don't visit every property every year.
Instead, Chief Appraiser Micah Mesquita says they rely on technology like aerial photography. So how do appraisers calculate your property value? Well, they take a lot of things into account, including those pictures from the air. They also look at the square footage of your home or business, the age, location, and sales data. The sales data includes comparing your property to similar properties that have sold in your area, the sale prices, and the terms and conditions of each sale.
We always say that you know your home better than we do. We're looking at mass volumes of data, and it's conceivable that we overlooked something or we made an error. And if so, the law also requires us not only to appraise at market value, but to look at the individual characteristics of your home.
Once the value of your property is calculated, you subtract any exemptions and then multiply that number by the tax rate. The total tax rate is calculated by adding up all the tax rates for each taxing entity. As we mentioned before, there are more than 60 taxing entities in Bexar County, but you don't pay taxes to all of these. You only pay the ones in your specific district. Here's an example of how much each taxing entity collects. We pulled these numbers from a Bexar County property owner's real tax bill. This homeowner pays taxes to 7 entities: Bexar County Road and Flood, San Antonio River Authority, Alamo Community College, University Health System, Bexar County, Northside ISD, and Bexar County Emergency District Number 2. Each of these set their own tax rate. You'll see that most of the money goes toward the school district, more than $3,700. Let's turn now to ways that you could try to reduce that amount of money that you owe, starting with exemptions. So what are they? Exemptions reduce the market value of your property, which in turn lowers what you're required to pay in taxes. Bexar County offers the following exemptions for residential properties: general homestead, disabled veteran exemption, and an over 65 exemption. There are also other exemptions for commercial properties, but let's focus on residential tonight. One of the exemptions you have probably heard a lot about is the homestead exemption. So let's talk about how that works. If your home is valued at $150,000 and you qualify for a $25,000 exemption, you would only pay taxes on the home as if it were worth $125,000. Anyone can apply for this Bexar County exemption for their primary residential property. You have to fill out this form and turn it into the Bexar County Appraisal District. The exemption is applied to your bill for the rest of the time that you live at that address. The form is due by April 30th. The city of San Antonio offers the same residential exemptions and recently approved adding a homestead exemption for the very first time. San Antonio was the last major Texas city to implement a homestead exemption. Just a few weeks ago, the council approved an exemption of 0.01% of your home's value. A drop in the bucket for some, but the 2 councilmen who pushed for that exemption say it's a start.
There's a breaking point. People are angry. People are upset.
City Councilman Clayton Perry says rising property taxes are high on the list of complaints he hears from people living in District 10.
We need to pay attention to that and do something about that. And we can do something about that.
And so, with a proposal from Perry and District 9 Councilman John Courage, the city did. In June, the council approved that 0.01% homestead exemption. The city says it will average out to be about a $28 a year savings for San Antonio homeowners in the next tax year. Perry and Courage want to see more.
I don't think we could next year say we're going to reduce all of the residential property taxes by 20%. That would be a significant impact on our budget. What I favor is an implementation over a few years of a gradual increase in a homestead exemption up to 20%.
Courage also hopes the exemption could boost the number of homeowners in San Antonio. According to data from the mayor's Housing Policy Task Force, from 2005 to 2016, just 12% of the city's new households purchased a home. 88% became renters.
I think that home ownership tends to promote more community involvement and people wanting and expecting more from their city government. And I think that's a good thing.
For those already owning a home, Perry believes an exemption will help them keep it.
Homeowners are saying that they need some help to keep them in their houses. And this is all part, to me, it's all part of our affordable housing program here in San Antonio. Let's offer a homestead exemption to make it affordable to stay in their houses where they're at.
The 0.01% homestead exemption will take roughly $6 million from the city's total budget for the next fiscal year. Meanwhile, the city of San Antonio is reviewing how the Bexar County Appraisal District operates. City council members asked for that review in light of soaring property taxes. That review will also look at how appraisal districts work in other Texas counties. Here's what Councilman Courage says that they are looking for.
See if there's a consistency, I think, in what the methodology is and the process is, and make sure that we're following that same kind of consistent pattern. And if there's something unusual or unique in another part of the state that can help us improve our system, then maybe that's something else we can adopt along with the procedures that we use here now.
The report on that review is supposed to be given to the council in September. An exemption is one way to save money on your property, but there's another way. Dispute the value of your home if you disagree with it. Here's how you file an appeal. You have to fill out this form. It's called a notice of protest. The deadline for filing a protest is midnight on May 15th. The form arrives in the mail along with your notice of appraised value, which is sent out in April. You can either do an informal hearing with an appraiser or a formal hearing in front of an appraisal review board. Both hearings require you to bring evidence showing why you believe your property isn't worth as much as it was appraised for. That evidence can include the appraised value of other homes in your neighborhood that are comparable to your house, pictures or recent estimates of internal or external damage. Again, Bexar County Appraisal District encourages people to file a protest, so don't be frightened by the process. Let's turn now to changes that came out of this legislative session. Property tax reform was a top priority, and the legislature finally made a move at the state level. Now the question is, what are those changes, and what do they mean for you and the city you live in? Courtney Friedman spoke to the executive editor of the Texas Tribune, who said a lot has to do with transparency.
Years in the making, property tax reform has finally been signed into state law. The reform comes in several pieces.
The first one is that cities and counties who want to raise their tax revenues from property taxes more than 3.5% have to ask voters first. School districts have to ask at 2.5%.
Texas Tribune executive editor Ross Ramsey explains that does not mean changing your rates.
If they limited your tax rate, then your taxes could still go up because of property value increases if your property got more valuable. So instead of doing that, they just limit the amount of money that a particular government can bring in from property taxes and say if that amount of money goes up more than 3.5%, and it's not due to growth in the district, but it's due to either higher tax rates or higher property appraisals, then they have to ask voters if it's okay to spend that money.
The answer is they have to live within your means as the taxpayer.
Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick says it's bringing the public into the decision-making process much earlier. Current law didn't allow voters to get involved until tax revenues were increased 8%. So 3.5% is a big drop. That was one point of tension during the legislative process.
But when you go to cities and counties, especially in fast-growing areas, they say, look, we have to keep up with growth for streets, for police, for fire, for all of these things. And a really low number, a really low limit on our ability to raise the money to pay for the things that people need is going to make it hard to do those things and hard to serve people in the way that they want to be served.
On the other side,
there are some places where these taxes just aren't growing that fast, or where people are so conservative that the local officials have just said, you know, put us under the limit, we don't mind.
Because the bottom line is these percentages don't mean the money will automatically be spent. It just means when the entity wants to spend that money, they have to ask for the public's permission. School districts will prompt voter approval at an even smaller rate, 2.5%. And that's because half their funding comes from the state.
So if they limit the local ability to raise money, the state government steps up with the money, and so they felt like they were safe doing it.
The next piece of reform was praised by all. It mandates more transparency, clearing up confusion for taxpayers.
A thing that'll go on your bill that'll say basically, here's what your rate is now, here's what it would be under what they proposed, and here's the level at which you get to involve yourself as a voter in this thing.
Ramsey calls the reform package a work in progress. Progress being the key word.
This is a very complex area, and I'm sure they're going to find something that they go whoops and come back in 2021 and try to fix. The idea here is that voters can watch it more carefully and control it a little bit better, and we'll see as we go forward how well that actually works.
It's also important to mention a caveat in this reform that helps smaller rural areas, where 2.5% or 3.5% of revenue is a tiny number, not near enough to buy something like a new fire truck. In those cases, there is a $500,000 limit that a small entity would be able to spend without asking voter approval. But if they exceed $500,000, it goes on the ballot.
All right, we know this was a lot of information on a rather dense topic, so we have put all of this on our website. Every story that you saw on property taxes tonight is on our website. Just go to ksat.com/news@9 and click on the property taxes section.